Words of joy and hope is the solemnity of the body and blood of Christ. Year B is the Gospel of Mark, chapter 14, 16, 25, and the commentary is by Father Fernando Armelini. A good Sunday for all. We all remember the restoration of Leonardo da Vinci of Last Supper, which lasted about 20 years. And for centuries, dust, garbage, humidity, smoke from candles had been deposited in the air. Also, steam from the kitchen foods from the fryers. A necessary cleansing task then took place to bring back to life the scene painted by Leonardo da Vinci. The original faces were not seen anymore, more visible. Something similar happened at the Last Supper celebrated by Jesus in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. That night, the Master had given a command: "Do this in memory of me," after having shared the bread and the chalice. The community of the first century, obeying this mandate of the Master, the Lord, met on Sundays for the Lord's Supper. This was the Eucharistic celebration of the first centuries. There were no other devotions, only the breaking of the bread of the community in memory of what the Lord had said during the Last Supper. They met in private houses. They shared the Eucharistic bread at the family table in an environment that was not sacred. There was nothing in their celebration that resembles the pompous celebration of the Temple of Jerusalem. No, the rite was simple, festive, authentic, and even provocative, because primitive communities were very conscious of the meaning of the rite they were doing. They knew very well what it meant to reach out, take and eat the bread, drink the glass of wine, and drink it with the brothers and sisters. They understood very well the provocative gesture made by Jesus. Certainly, during the Last Supper, the apostles had not understood the gesture made by Jesus. But after Easter, they understood it very well. What happened during centuries? It began to lose sight of the meaning of that celebration, of sharing bread, and even the reference to the Last Supper. Many devotions began around the Eucharist, some respectable, but others very debatable, especially when they led to eclipse the nature of this celebration. And it is significant that the Second Vatican Council, to highlight the authentic meaning of what Jesus had done during the Last Supper, says nothing about the Eucharistic devotions that were so important for centuries. We know that these popular devotions, once the authentic meaning of these celebrations have been lost, have given us saints, yes, and therefore are respectable. But we must analyze which ones represent the authentic meaning of the Eucharist and those that instead obfuscate it a little. The text of today's Gospel puts before us the original painting, the first celebration of the Eucharist, free of those incrustations that have been deposited throughout centuries. It is decisive for the life of the Church to become aware of what happened in that Passover, that Easter in Jerusalem. And it is always at that supper to which we must refer if we want to understand what we do when we celebrate the Eucharistic banquet on the Lord's Day. On the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go to prepare for you to eat the Passover?" He sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, and a man will meet you, carrying a jar of water. Follow him. Wherever he enters, say to the master of the house, 'The teacher says, where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?'" The text begins with a datum saying that it was the first day of the unleavened bread. The first day of the unleavened bread is the Easter, the Passover, the beginning of a week in which the Israelites abstain of everything that has leaven. And the meaning was to make a cut off from the past, and start a completely new reality. We know that the yeast was the leftover food, the leftover pasta. And the Israelites, during this week, they eliminate everything that is from the past. And the meaning is that the Passover feast begins a completely new reality. And our Eucharistic celebration is placed in this Paschal context. Rashi, the most celebrated medieval commentator of the Bible, said that the Torah should not start with the book of Genesis, but with the 12th chapter of the book of Exodus, because chapter 12 speaks of the origin of the people of Israel. We have begun to exist with Easter, with the liberation of Egypt, and the time of our freedom as a people has begun. And every year, the Israelites celebrate this memory of the beginning of their existence as a people. We Christians also remember our Easter, the decisive advent of our history. It is the point of reference of the community of disciples. And in the Eucharist, we celebrate our origin, our birth, because as Christians, we were born of Easter. Just as the Israelites remember their history, the liberation of Egypt, we remember in the celebration of the Eucharist the beginning of our history as disciples of Christ with the Easter celebration. The unleavened bread. It is the beginning of a new reality. For the people Israel, it has a beautiful meaning. The unleavened bread has an important meaning because even now, the night before Easter, the whole family must take the candlelight and go to throw it into the fire, even the smallest sign of yeast. And the book of Talmud, which is a sacred book for the Hebrews, says that the yeast that is eliminated is not only a material yeast, but it is a very important symbol for the people of Israel. It means that everything that is bad must be removed, everything that is slavery. And the book of the Talmud specifically speaks that it is the evil instinct that dwells in the person that should be thrown out. Therefore, arrogance, rudeness, vulgarity, hardness of heart, hardness of the face, shame, all these was represented in the leaven that must be expelled. Because at Easter, the Israelites celebrate the beginning of a completely new world, the beginning of the world of freedom. And the one who lives with these passions is a slave, is not free. And it's also the meaning of Easter for Christians, the yeast that must be eliminated. And Paul, in the first letter of the Corinthians in chapter 5, it seems that this letter was written precisely around Easter. It says, take off the old yeast to be a new dough, because you yourself are the unleavened bread. 1 Corinthians 5:7. As Christians are unleavened, they are pure. The text that we have heard tell us about the preparation of that dinner, of a supper, that we must understand well. Also, our celebration have to be well prepared, not only outwardly, but inwardly prepared, because we have to interiorize well the meaning of what we are going to do, so that it not become a hypocritical or meaningless sign, a ritual that says nothing, no incidents in our life. We have to prepare it well. Jesus went to celebrate this supper. There is an oral mystery in this preparation, precisely because Jesus did not want to be taken to death in the hands of those who wanted to get him out of the way before this meal. For Jesus, it was very important to celebrate this meal with his disciples. He knew, of course, that Judas was planning to deliver him. Judas has not allowed himself to be converted to the new world, to the new man, and remained tied up to his old convictions. His dream was the same as that of his people, the dream presented and preached by the spiritual guides of Israel. Judas did not let himself be converted, and he saw in Jesus a dangerous person who should be taken out of the way. Judas, of course, did not do that for money. That came later. It was not that money that interested him. Judas was worried because this Jesus dispensed with many of the religious conceptions of his people. And that is why he decided to deliver him. The gospel never says that Judas betrayed Jesus. It says that he delivered. So, what did Jesus say to two of his disciples, John and Peter? They must prepare that place. It's a symbol of what our Eucharistic celebration have to do also, to prepare it. And what is the signal that it gives for him who has to introduce him into the house that they have to do this supper? A man carrying a jug of water. The water could only be extracted from the Siloam pool. Archaeologists have discovered a stairway that came down from Mount Zion, from the upper part of the city to the pool of Siloam. Jesus had come down that stairs that night. It is moving to observe that stairway that Jesus has walked barefooted. These two disciples had to observe this man who came out of the pool of Siloam with a bucket of water in his head. How did they recognize him? Very simple, because no man would carry a bucket of water on his head. Men carried water on their shoulders. Therefore, it was very easy to recognize this man, because this is what women did, a humble service. A very important message for us today. The distinctive sign that guides us towards the authentic Eucharistic celebration, the one that introduces us to the authentic meaning of the Eucharist, is the one who becomes a servant, who does even the work of women without feeling humiliated, the one who chooses the last position, the one who does not feel humiliated when kneeling before those who need him. This takes us to the authentic meaning of the Eucharist. It introduces us into this room. Let us listen what these two disciples should do to prepare that dinner. Then they will show you a large upper room, furnished and ready. Make the preparation for us there. The disciples then went off, entered the city, and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. The evangelist wants to emphasize the characteristics the two disciples have prepared in the room for the Lord's Supper. And the first characteristic, this room is on the upper plane. The first generation of Christians, the community guided by James, the brother of the Lord, one of the family of Jesus, continued to celebrate the Eucharist on the Lord's Day in that room, on the upper plane. And recently archaeology has brought to light a synagogue of that time in the place where the Hebrews remember the place of David's tomb. It was not David's tomb, but it was an old synagogue that had been used by the first Christians. What these first Christians, guided by James, do there? They celebrate the liturgy of the word in the synagogue. Then in the upper room, they celebrated the Eucharistic banquet. Why did the evangelist indicate that it was in the upper room? As a chronicle, it does not matter much. But in this detail, the evangelist wants to give us a message for us, for our celebrations of the Eucharist. We know that in the early church, they try to celebrate the Eucharist even in other places, also in the upper level. We recall, for example, we read that Paul celebrates the Eucharist in Troade, at the upper room, when Eutychus falls from the window, Acts 29. We are not interested here in the material aspect, but we are interested in the message that the evangelist wants to give us for our celebrations today. It must be celebrated in the upper floor, not in the ground floor. If the disciples want to celebrate an authentic Eucharist, they should go to the higher place. In the lower place are the people who lead a life guided by a logic that is not that of the highest place. To celebrate the authentic Eucharist requires rising above the criteria and values that the world has. The Christian despises nobody, does not judge anyone, but he must know that in that place, in the upper room, one needs to reason and diverse in a completely different way. It is the opposite way on the scale of value of the lower part. The scale of values on the lower part, it is turned upside down in the upper room. So, down. The one who serves is the poor. The one who should bow down in front of the bosses, those who give orders, because they are inferior. They do not count at all. But on the higher plane, this person is very important, worthy of honor. In the lower part are the bosses, the dominators, the arrogant ones, those who can raise their voices and to silence anyone. These are the successful people. But on the higher plane, these are the failures. For the Eucharist to be authentic, then, it must be celebrated by people who have made a conversion, a change, a turning of the scale of values that guides their lives. Second feature, the room is large. Not only materially, it means that the authentic Eucharist must be celebrated by a welcoming church which has a big heart, which is a place of communion. Remember the parable of the banquet in the Gospel of Luke, when the servant, the slave, is sent out 3 times to fill the room. And the last time he is sent out, he is told, "Go out to the highways and country lanes and force people to come in to ensure that my house is full." Luke 14:23. This is the big room. The church is welcoming. Also, the one who has had a disorderly life, the abandoned, the ragged Lazarus of the world, everyone is welcome in that room. And they are not judged, but loved by the brothers and sisters. The community is not scandalized by the brothers and sisters who did not have an exemplary life. In this room, nobody is judged, nobody gossips. In this room, the errors committed are not reproached. Those who want to enter this room are accepted as they are, only that they understand what is expected of their life once they have approached the Eucharistic banquet. In our church today, the message is one of openness of the heart, because in this room we all enter, the weak, the fragile, and all who want to participate in this Eucharistic banquet. Now the third characteristic of this room: it is arranged with divans and arranged for supper, for Easter, for the celebration of freedom, of victory, of life. Easter is the festival of freedom. And how did these Hebrews celebrated Easter? Not sitting, but lying down. They had adapted to the customs of the Greek and the Romans, who in turn had copied from the Persians. To celebrate victory, freedom, they ate lying down. It was a very uncomfortable position because they lay down on the pillows and then put the left elbow on a cushion, and the right hand was used to feed on the table that was in the middle. A very uncomfortable position, but it indicated that the person was not afraid of anyone. The person was free, and the Hebrews had adopted this use. And on Easter night they celebrated dinner lying like this. It is significant that dinner is prepared so that people express that they are free people. They must have left behind all their slavery on the ground floor. Otherwise, it does not make sense to celebrate this banquet. If they are still slaves of the attachment to money, the attention is only in accumulation, then one is not prepared for freedom. One is still a slave. And if they still pursue their own interests, their own satisfaction, they are still slaves. If they cultivate rancor in their hearts, they are not free. You are also a slave when there are resentments that are motivated by pride because it contrasts the great image that you have of yourself. You are fragile. Accept your weakness because Christ loves you as you are. If you are a slave of grudges, you are not free to celebrate the Eucharist. If you are a slave of emotional blackmail, you are not free. And still worse, if you are still a slave to the image of a severe God, how will you be able to celebrate the feast of gratuitous love? If you are a slave of whims, of vices, of your habits that not only do not do you good, but you will not be in a good mood to celebrate the banquet. We are aware that we all enter in this room while we are not completely free, but we must be aware that that celebration wants to take us to freedom of everything that does not allow us to be true people, to be like Christ. Let us now listen to what happened during the Last Supper. While they were eating, he took bread, said the blessing, broke it, gave it to them, and said, "Take it, this is my body." Then he took a cup, gave thanks, and gave it to them, and they all drank from it. He said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which will be shed for many. Amen, I say to you, I shall not drink the full fruit of the vine until the day I drink it new in the kingdom of God." Then, after singing a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Let us try to understand well what happened during the Last Supper. Jesus knows he is going to die. He is aware that his life comes to an end. We are wondering, what is the most worrying in his heart at that moment? Could it be that the disciples need to worship him? Certainly not. There is something else in his heart. He wants that the new world he started will not end with his death. He wants his disciples committed to give continuity to the new man he introduced into the world. Not the man-beast who wants to dominate over others, but the man-servant, the lamb. He wants a world to be born where people be free, that they be lambs, not beasts. And he wants to put a sign in front of his disciples to indicate this project of a new man that he has carried out in his life. What sign is that? At a certain moment, while they were having dinner, he took bread, he does not say the bread, as if he were a big host. No, he extends the hand and takes the bread that was on the table. What is the sign that Jesus is choosing? In the Semitic conception, bread means everything that is necessary for life. The basic food, symbol of all other foods. Eating bread means feeding. When the person is hungry, it's not enough to just fill the stomach. The person is hungry for many things to fulfill his life in fullness. He hungers for love, for health, for knowing, needs to be accepted, also being forgiven, hungers for justice. He also needs a caress. All these needs must be satisfied so that life be fully human. And what does Jesus do? After having taken of the bread, he pronounces the blessing. So let us keep in mind the meaning of everything the person needs for life. It is the food for a complete life. Then he will also talk about wine, because the person does not need only of what he feeds materially his life, but of what is symbolized in the wine. The joy that is necessary for a full, a complete human life. He pronounces the blessing. To bless means to recognize that everything that is on the table, everything that feeds our life, comes from the Lord. It is a free gift of His kindness. We recognize that we do not own this food of life. And as I have said before, it is not only bread that satisfies hunger, but all food that allows us to live fully human life. The goods are not ours, they are all of God. It is the new interpretation of the goods of the world that can no longer be the object of possessions and accumulation. They are gifts of the love of the Creator God, therefore gifts that must be shared with the recipients. Who are those who are in need of these gifts that are not ours? They belong to God. On the ground floor, on the other hand, they are not God's gift. They are the food of life that some have monopolized and that then begin to negotiate to make those in need pay for it. This is the way people relate on the ground floor. But the one who enters into the evangelical conception, which is the one of Christ, that of the upper room, considers all goods not as honor, but as a gift of the gratuity of God's love. Gifts that must be shared. We are well done, well made. We are made to create love. If we were self-sufficient, we will satisfy each one of us our own hunger without relating to our brothers and sisters, and love would not be born. Instead, we have been made to take care of the gift of God and in need of the gifts that other brothers and sisters have. And in this exchange of gifts, humanity is realized as God wanted it from the beginning of creation. That of the children who love each other. They exchange love, and this love is the life that He has given us. What are bread and wine? There are signs that Jesus has sought to present His entire history. They are, first of all, fruits of the earth. We know that in the bread and in the wine, the energies of the soil are concentrated, like the minerals. And then inside, there are the energy of heaven, the rain, the wind, the light, the heat, the sun's rays. But the bread, it is not only that enters. Bread does not grow in the field. Wheat grows. The wine does not grow. The grape grows. What is it that makes up the bread? Not only what nature gives us, but the work of man. Jesus has not looked for raw products from the trees. He has searched as a sign of all His history the place where the work of man enters. In the bread are concentrated the fatigue of the people, the work of transforming creation and making it usable for our life. Let us think. During dinner, around the table, where there is bread. What do people sitting there see? Let's imagine a family from Nazareth like the family of Jesus. The father, the older children, sitting at the table. They saw in the bread their fatigue, their sweat. When they had plowed, planted, the mother also saw her weariness because she had crushed the grain. She had made flour. She had cooked it in the oven. And even the little boy saw his work in this bread because he was asked to go and fetch water from the fountain in Nazareth. And from the house of Joseph to the fountain in Nazareth is 900 meters. Even children saw that their own work at that bread. Everyone has contributed for the food of the family. Everything each one had, to everyone's joy. Everything was freely put in common. In the family, one does not pay for the work that each one does according to the capacity, the strength that have been donated by God. They put everything in that food so that everyone can feed and enjoy. The blessing recognizes that everything is a gift from God. It's a hymn to the gratuity of God, and it is a proposal to live in the gratuity. The pagans buy, sell, fill honors. This happens on the ground floor. But on the upper room is the disciple of Christ who knows he is not the owner and is only an administrator of the goods that the Creator has put in his hands to create love. What else did Jesus do during the last summer? He broke the bread so it could be shared. The first meaning of Eucharistic communion is the awareness that we are guests of God. We are not rivals around the food that we must monopolize, ignoring the needs of others. This is not the conception of the one who has assimilated God's plan that has been revealed in Jesus of Nazareth, and that is represented in the sign of this Eucharistic banquet. Then he has donated it, giving it the logical consequence. The gift received is to be shared, and Jesus says, "Take and eat. This is my body." What does this expression mean? For a Semite, the body does not indicate muscles, bones, blood. No. The body is the person that he or she carried out throughout his or her life, his story. Let me give you an example. When I observed my father, who was 75 years old, a person who had worked all her life and suffered and has been even in the concentration camp, when I looked at him and I saw all his history, all the life he has lived, that is what I saw. Also the injustices he had suffered, the service for the brothers and sisters. That was the body, the person with all his history. So when Jesus says, "This is my body," he presents his whole story in this sign. I became bread. This is my body, means this is me. Not that it is not the bread that transforms itself into Jesus. In the past it was thought that with the consecration we could bring Jesus down from heaven to enter the bread. No, it is Jesus who presents his whole story saying, "Do you want to know who am I? I am bread. All my life is transformed into food for life, a source of joy for the brothers and sisters. This is me. Take and eat. Take. It is the first order that Jesus gives. To take, it is the conscious gesture of one who accepts this proposal that Jesus makes us. What does to eat mean? Eating means assimilating. When we take that bread, we eat that bread. We make it a gesture, which means I want to assimilate your donated life story. This is the only meaning of the Eucharist. And it must be put well in evidence. We recognize that people have been blinded by many devotions. We must take it to the provocative meaning. Take and eat that bread means to respond to the proposal of life that Jesus makes. And this is the one. If you want to join your life to mine, take and eat. Comply with this sign and let it be an authentic sign and not a rite that maybe has lost its meaning. It is interesting that Pope Paul VI said, when you present that bread, say, happy those invited to the wedding of the Lord, the wedding of the Lamb. Eating that bread is a proposal of love. Do you want to join your life to mine? This is the meaning of the Eucharistic gesture that we approach on the Lord's Day. We have understood that touching that bread means assimilating his life. This is his body that then becomes our body. And thus, in the celebration of the Eucharist, it must be seen the life of Christ donated through our life, because we have united our lives with his. Then the chalice. We know what is the meaning of blood for an Israelite. It's life. Jesus invites us to drink from that cup, to drink of his life, to welcome his life in us, to let that spirit that has animated all his history and has made him donate everything until the last moment becomes in us the acceptance of his life, of his project of love. And everyone will drink. Nobody is excluded. Everyone has accepted his proposal. I want to conclude now with a question that I am often asked. They tell me, is it not enough to celebrate once in our life this Eucharist in which we unite ourselves to Christ? Why every week on the Lord's Day do we celebrate this gesture? Some even say that it is a useless gesture, a waste of time. We can give food to those who need and clothes to those who need, but the celebrating the Eucharist doesn't do anything of this. This for us is a waste of time. To this question, I give two answers. The first and most important: we participate in the Eucharistic celebration, first of all, to become aware that we are people loved for free. To enter this logic of unconditional and free love of God, to feel loved just as we are, even if we are fragile sinners, still we know that we are loved and that we have been filled with the free gifts to share them freely with joy with the brothers and sisters. If it were a waste of time, when you become aware of this love, then it is also a waste of time every moment when the spouses come together to connect with their life choices and they enjoy their reciprocal love. It is the moment when we are happy to feel loved by God. A second reason I presented with an example. When we go to the beach, we lose time. We sunbathe and do nothing, but we are convinced that it is not a waste of time because we tan, we embellish ourselves, we become stronger, we relax. Then we will have fewer diseases during winter. We have not wasted our time. We were allowed ourselves to be tanned by that sun. And to participate in the Eucharistic celebration is to make a beauty cure, to stand before the sun that is Christ. And if we do not sunbathe at least once a week, we get ugly. Soon we lose the color of His gratuitous love. We put ourselves every Sunday in front of this Word and of His person who has donated His life. We are confronted with His unconditional love, and we remain for a little while under these rays of His testimony of love. This healing removes many wounds caused by our egoism, our weaknesses, our pride, and makes us more willing, more prepared, more able to love. I wish everyone a good Sunday and a good week.